Hello, Sahar Tartak. Thank you for joining me today.
Thank you for having me.
Sahar, I wanted to ask you if you could briefly tell us about your experience in Yale these last couple of weeks, one might say, about everything that's going on with the protests, and how do you feel as a Jew who's visibly Jewish and known for being Jewish? How does that affect you?
Sure. Thank you so much for asking. So, in the past couple of weeks, anti-Semitic protesters at Yale have taken over campus. They have occupied central plazas on campus with tent encampments, with memorials to terrorists that students were dropping off flowers at, and with regular protests calling for Israel's destruction, calling for one solution, intifada revolution, and numerous other anti Semitic slogans and chants. And as they continue to occupy campus and continue to protest every night, last weekend, I and a Hasidic Jewish friend both decided to attend the protest and take a video so that we could have documentation as student journalists. And upon showing up at the rally, my friend Netanel and I were both immediately blockaded by a group of rally organizers. Again, these were students, and they linked arms with each other and they stood in front of us and did not let us walk. So we were both being tracked by, again, multiple protesters, and eventually Netanel and I were separated. And so then it was just me with a group of students, rally organizers, with their arms linked, blockading me and not letting me move around. And they followed me everywhere I went until finally they cornered me in between myself and the 500 students attending that evening's rally that had encircled me and were singing and dancing and holding hands while they ran around me in a circle. And they began to taunt me. So the rally organizers were taunting me by waving flashlights in my face and blockading me. And then the students who were attending the rally joined in by waving things in my face, such as their keffiyehs, by giving me the middle finger. And then eventually one of these students waved his Palestinian flag in my face and jabbed me with it in my left eye. And when I tried to run after him, the student organizers who were blockading me continued to blockade me so that they could protect him and protect his identity. And so I went to the police and they called an ambulance. And so I was checked out by the EMT who said I should go to the hospital, and I went to the hospital.
Well, I hope everything is okay now, medically.
Thank God everything is fine with me, physically, but I would say that the protests have actually gotten much worse.
Much worse since the occasion you've described. Can you tell us how, in your estimation, they have gotten worse? In what way?
Sure. So it sounds like once a student is assaulted, it's impossible for things to get any worse. But the tent encampment was removed by the police, and then students set up another tent encampment with an even bigger protest with about twice as many people, more like 1,000 people marching through campus. And the slogans and the messaging and the posters became even more anti-Semitic than they were before. So, for instance, students were chanting Ilamaya, Ilamaya, Palestina, Arabaya. From the river to the sea, Palestine will be Arab, which of course is a call for ethnic cleansing of Jewish people in the Middle East. What else? There were posters up all over the school accusing students of being, quote, too drunk off of the blood of the oppressed, end quote. So that's, classic blood libel, accusing Jews of drinking people's blood. There was a life-sized puppet of Joe Biden, except it was a Jewish Joe Biden, and he had a big nose, and he was wearing an apron covered in blood, as though to say that, again, he was like cooking and eating human beings. So there was a lot of blood libel, there was a lot of calls for genocide. There was already this before, but it was even more pronounced, so much so that a number of Jewish students who had been supporting the protests actually stopped attending.
But you've said that overall the protests have grown.
Yeah,
So more people from the fringes have come, but some people from the center have left. This is what I understand.
I don't know that that's true. I think more people from all over campus have come, and that just a couple of Jews that had been there were already very few Jews, and then the couple that were there left.
Okay, so I would like to challenge you about some of your descriptions. I'll start with what you've just said, the Jews at the rallies, at these protests. Your your opponents would say that these protests are multinational, multicultural, multi-faith, something that everyone can agree on, something that is not, you know, something that is very widely accepted in a sense. I guess that would mean that many Jews are attending these protests, and that even Jews are opposing what's happening in Gaza, etc. So, how would you respond to that?
Sure. So, like many of the things that the protesters and their supporters say, that's just a lie. I attended the protest. I was right in the middle. There was a group of students, about 10 students, holding a large banner that said, Jews for ceasefire. And I looked at all the students, and I know the Jewish students at Yale. So I looked at them and I was like, do I recognize any of these people? And I did not recognize a single one. So now what you have is a lot of people that claim to be Jewish but aren't. Um, or what you get is one or two Jewish students at these rallies, maybe five, who are willing to say, yes, I'm Jewish and I represent Jewish people, when in reality, the vast majority of Jews do not attend these rallies, are not comfortable with the language, and know that these people have been supporting violence against Jews since October 7th. I mean, the same group that organized the rally that I'm talking about after October 7th said on social media that we should, quote, celebrate the resistance's success.
Okay, so I have another question about that because I've spoken to another student from Colombia, which is located in New York, of course,
Right.
and and I've gathered from her responses that there are more Jews at these rallies, actually not as few as you're describing. Could it be because of the particular Jewish community that lives in New York and their particular religious beliefs?
So I think there's definitely some differentiation between religious beliefs of the Jews that attend these rallies. Um, Oftentimes, Jewish students that have never had, any like connection to Judaism find that the way all of their friends relate to Judaism, their non-Jewish friends, is in a negative way of being against Israel, and they feel that that's how they should be relating to Judaism as Jews as well. And so then they tokenize themselves. I imagine that just with Colombia being a bigger Jewish community and having more Jewish people, of course, there's going to be a bigger number. But again, it's a question of proportions. And proportionately, it's lower on both sides, right? So at Yale, more students are either against or just not attending the rallies who are Jewish, and then are attending or are very actively involved. And it's the same story at Columbia.
That's actually a good response that I haven't thought about. But what I meant particularly was that there is in New York a particular Jewish community of, I think it is Hasidic Jews, who are anti-Zionist as a religious belief, right? They do not believe that Israel should exist because Israel should only exist after the Messiah comes or something like that. Could it be that the location of this particular religious community is good for the protests because they can just feed off these guys who are anti-Zionist Jews, basically? So, do you think that this has anything to do with it?
It's an interesting thesis, but here's why. As of October 7th, I would say no. The Jewish community that you are thinking of is probably Satmar and Neturei
Yeah,
Karta.
yeah,
Okay.
okay.
So Satmar, after October 7th, explicitly stated that as much as we oppose the existence of Israel, we are not the same as the anti-Semites that are celebrating October 7th. So they have differentiated and said that is not us. Um, Nijiray Karta is a much, much smaller sect, and they're very loud, but there's only a couple hundred of them, and they're not, to my knowledge, in Manhattan proper. Um, and by the way, interestingly enough, Nijiray Karta was kicked out of Satmar and then created a separate entity. So I wouldn't like that. That's not my guess. My guess is not that that it's a matter of a couple of loud members of a fringe group. I think New York is a big liberal city, and you
Hmm.
see the same thing in California.
Okay, so that pretty much answers my question quite well. I have another thing that I want to challenge you on. Let's accept your premise that these protests are not multicultural and multi-faith and all that things. Okay, what makes these protests anti-Semitic? Because I can be critical of Israel and all the things you've said. Okay, the thing about Joe Biden as a Jew with an apron, it's difficult for me to defend, but I'll try to defend the other. I'll try to defend the other things. Okay, so saying from the river to the sea, these people would claim something like, well, we don't mean, well, when you said it in Arabic, it's harder to defend. But the English translation from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free, is they would say that they mean just for the liberation of the Palestinians to have equal rights across the West Bank or the Gaza Strip or what have you. So, what makes that anti-Semitic? And they would also say about the Intifada, the chance for Intifada, they would say that Intifadas could be peaceful. For example, they would say that the first Intifada started out peaceful, the first couple of months at least, and they could also say, I've actually heard it being said that many things could be considered intifadas, like, for example, you could say the Arab Spring could be considered an intifada, and much of it was not violent. Or I've even heard it being claimed that the Warsaw Ghetto uprising was an intifada. So do tell me, how is an intifada inherently anti-Semitic, and how is from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free, inherently anti-Semitic?
Sure, it's a good question. And I think my advice would be to ask these people themselves and examine what they actually believe a quote, free Palestine would look like and how that would actually be executed. And if they have opinions against the ethnic cleansing of Jewish people, right? So one execution of Palestine will be free and Intifada was October 7th. And the students that are chanting from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free, will not condemn October 7th. They don't have it in them to say it was wrong. And some of them are pretty explicit about the fact that it's in some way right and effective. So that's number one, right? Just see what these students think about terrorism in the first place. See what their view is. If their view is this is actually an acceptable method of intifada, if this is an acceptable method of freeing Palestine, which is what they're saying, then I would say that they're anti-Semitic. In that,
Wait, how
they
is
are
that
very,
specifically anti-Semitic?
I'll tell you,
Okay.
in that they're very open to the murder of Jewish civilians in a way that they are not anyone else.
Okay.
So, do you have any clarification,
No,
or
no,
was that
no, no.
clear?
Go on.
That's test number one. You can't condemn October 7th. You maybe even celebrate it. Fine. Um, I think it's very relevant that from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free comes from the river to the sea, Palestine will be Arab, which is what these students are shouting right now. And why would you say that in the first place? Because you believe that every Jew living in the region, and this is just false, is living on stolen land. And if you believe that the Jews living in the region are living on stolen land, which they do, which is how they refer to Israel, and how they refer to the migration of Jewish people to the region as, violent period of stolen land, then the proper and most honest um, line of reasoning from there is to expel the Jews of the region. And they can say, no, we're not open to that. But what other solution is there for moving millions of Palestinians back into their homes, right? What is right of return? Where where do you have the right to return to? If they believe, which they do, the Palestinians have the right to return back to their homes, which they perceive as all of Israel proper, then that's call for evacuation of Jews from the region. And that land is the land between the river to the sea. Um, so again, it's just a question of what are the policy implications of these students. And yeah, they might say we believe in peace, but those are just words. And that's become clear because they won't condemn violence when it happens. And they make calls that in the um, in the tradition of their Palestinian neighbors, right, of actual, Gazan leadership, of many actual Gazan civilians, they make calls that are about violence, right? Um, when Palestinians talk in the Gaza Strip about, the Al Aqsa flood, right, which is what they refer to as October 7th, that's something that people here talk about too. The use of the term flood is very popular. And you could say, no, we're doing a nonviolent flood. But then the question becomes, why are you repeating and copying the rhetoric of people that are, committing acts of genocide and ethnic cleansing against Jewish people? Why can't you come up with your own language, right? Same thing with saying there's only one solution, intifada revolution. One solution sounds very similar to final solution. And there's a reason for that.
Well, you make a compelling case. I have another question for you. How representative do you think these protests are of the general public sentiment in the United States?
Thank God I don't think they're representative at all. I think many Americans look at this and say, these are spoiled college students that have decided to project victimhood onto themselves because they have not actually dealt with serious problems, and have the privilege of living in a Western country, and are not like really not taking themselves like or the world around them seriously. I think Americans really don't like this, actually. I will say, I think sentiment against Israel is probably going to get worse as as the country um, ages out and this generation gets into Congress and whatnot. But as of right now, I don't think these protests are very popular.
Are you an Israeli as well, Sahar?
No, my dad lived in Israel for 10 years. He made Aliyah, and then he and my mother got married and they came back to America.
Okay, so another question I wanted to ask you, and this is the final one. Does the faculty of the university participate in these protests?
Oh yeah, faculty for justice in Palestine, from my understanding at
Wait,
Yale,
wait,
has
wait,
agreed.
wait, wait, wait. What was this combination of words just now that I've
Sorry,
heard?
sorry. We have a faculty group on campus called Faculty for Justice in Palestine.
What? Okay.
It's anti-Israel faculty, anti-Semitic, whatever.
Okay, go on.
They intend to stage a walkout at graduation.
Which is soon, right?
So
This is supposed to happen
yeah,
soon. Okay.
that's in a couple of weeks. That's one example. Um, Many university administrators, heads of colleges, which are like colleges within Yale, attended the rally to show support. Um,
How widespread
yeah,
is this among the faculty members?
I think it's pretty widespread. Like it depends on the department, right? So the women's gender,
This was my
sexuality,
next question. Yeah, that was my next
yeah,
question.
the women's gender sexuality studies department. I've been there, and there are like pictures of like anti-Israel posters all over uh, professors' doors. There's a picture of like Bibi eating a watermelon, the shape of Israel, and his like there's blood running out of his mouth. so as to imply that like Jews like devour Palestinian land or whatever. Um, so yeah, it depends on the department. Like you don't get a lot of this in the physics department, but like a decent amount in history, English, um, yeah, ethnicity, race, and migration has a lot of this stuff. They co-sponsor events. So departments will put their names and faculty will put their names on different anti-Israel panels and say, "Hey, our department is sponsoring this."
Sounds quite terrifying, I'll be honest with you. Well, but
It is.
thank you for letting us know, regardless. This has been very helpful. Thank you, Sahar Tartak. Please be safe.
Thank you.
Have a good one.